Swords, feel the wars, fighting my blood down to the core. Warriors from medieval age, fear the reign of night brigades. Crusades into the room, moving through the temples and tombs. Scared and place, prepare to face Professor Awesome and the minions of doom. 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 Professor Awesome and the minions of doom.
Hello and welcome back. So a question I get a lot is how to tell the difference between a popular source and a professional and scholarly source. And I go over this a lot in my classes, but I thought I would make a video for you because I also get this sometimes from people, from high school students, or people who just generally are trying to figure this out. And there is a kind of generational difference here. So for example, when I was when I was in high school, I remember we had to do research papers, and my teachers laughably told us that good sources were Time, Newsweek, and U.S. News and World Report, which, by the way, in case you're wondering, are bad sources for almost any information ever. But this was what they said they were, and we all did our research out of this, and we did our research papers that might as well have come out of Pez dispensers. They were so bad. And but nevertheless, this is what we did. So I go off to university with this knowledge that this is a good way to find good sources. And I double majoring in English and political science. And I do my first political science research paper. And not surprisingly, my professor took a very dim view to my sources. But I didn't know what to do. And so I remember very clearly, I was literally walking around the library, just wandering aimlessly. I wasn't even looking at anything particular. I just was wandering around the library, didn't know how to find a professional or scholarly source at all. And I was assigned to do a paper on AIDS, the disease AIDS in Romania. And I was thinking, I guess I'm just going to have to find some articles about AIDS and find some, reference works about Romania. And that's going to be, just mash them together and call that a paper. I had no information. I had nothing. And I remember knowing that was going to, because I'd done so badly on my first assignment, knowing that was not going to fly, but I didn't know what to do. And I looked down and my shoe was untied. And this is a wonderful, this was a wonderful accident in my life. My shoe was untied, and I bent down to tie my shoe. And on the bottom shelf to my right was a set of transcripts that the U.S. State Department had of sources from various Eastern European countries that they had translated into English. And I thought, and it was like a whole series of these. They were published, I think, in this country by Radio Liberty, Radio Bell, perhaps. I'm blanking on that a little bit. It's been some years. And I went and I thought, well, maybe they've got something about Romania in here. And I pulled them out and I start reading, because they're organized by country. And I discover there's this huge AIDS epidemic in Romania, and there's all this information, all this research about it. It was amazing. And I thought, well, why didn't I know that this existed? And so I wrote my next research paper and got an A, and my professors praised me for my great research. And that began me kind of understanding how to do good research. And for the remainder of my time, my professors would praise me for doing good research as if I was a smart guy, when in point of fact, I was a guy who, by some miracle, his shoelace happened to come untied at just the right moment. I learned this by complete accident. Well, now things are a little bit different, because today, everyone is at the bottom of a waterfall of information that's just falling on them. And they have to try to get a drink of water from this powerful waterfall that's pounding on them, and they don't know what's good or bad coming out of that. And so when I was a student, it was about, how do I find sources? Today, the untied shoelace wouldn't help a student. They have so many sources, but they can't tell good from bad. And that is an important element. How do you know a good from a bad source? Or more importantly, a scholarly from a non-scholarly source. And so I'm going to talk about this as if it's simple. It's actually complicated. So the main thing you want to think about is, what do experts look at? Like, that's the big question. What do experts read? What do experts look at? And you might think, well, I'm not an expert. True, but you're getting an education to become an expert in a thing. Now, you might not be the world's greatest expert on it. You might just have the expert that the sort of average person working in that field has. But the average person working in every field knows more than the average person not working in that field. The average sheet metal worker knows way more about sheet metal than I know about sheet metal. And that's appropriate. They have some more expertise than I am. Now, maybe they don't know what some physicist who's doing materials engineering for a hardware company knows about the sheet metal and how it's produced, or something like this. But they know a lot, and certainly more than me. And this is what you're trying to do in any part of your education, is become an expert. And so you want to look at what the experts look at. Okay, that helps as a general principle. But in fact, how do I recognize this? Well, it can be a little bit challenging because, of course, a lot of people out there who don't know what they're talking about are trying to inflate their credentials or inflate their way of make it look like they're more important than they are. Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to talk about a few things that you can recognize. So one thing in a book that you want to look at is, does it have a works cited page or a bibliography? If it doesn't, then you can pretty much guarantee it's not going to be a good source. Because what scholars do and what experts do is they communicate with other scholars and with other experts. And they do that by talking about the work of other people. And by referencing those works that other experts will know. Okay? If they're not doing that, if you read through it and there's never a reference to someone else's work, it's probably not a good source. Same is true for articles. You want to look you want to look at, are they citing other sources, and where does the article come from? Who's the person who's writing this? So very often I'll have students who will say, well, I have this scholarly source that I Googled and found, because look at this long works cited page, and the source is a bunch of nonsense. And then I go to the source and I realize some freshman somewhere else has just uploaded their own freshman essay. And my freshman, looking at the works cited page, thought, well, they must be an expert, without having any clue who they are. Once you're an expert in the field, you know who else is an expert in the field. You see this on television sometimes where, you'll watch the History Channel, Discovery Channel, and they have talking heads, and they'll say, they'll have something that says, the expert will be talking. They'll say, so-and-so MIT, so-and-so University of Texas, so-and-so historian. Why did the one say historian? Well, what it really means is unemployed crackpot who says things that we want to hear to make this show entertaining. The reason it says historian rather than where they work is because they're not employed anywhere. But you don't know that until you sort of start thinking about, well, what is the source of this material, right? Okay. And that's true for websites too. Who's publishing the website? Who is this person? If you found it on 4chan or Reddit, it's probably not a good scholarly source. That isn't to say that there aren't scholarly things on there, but you would not rely on them. So for example, I, as a scholar, will sometimes use social media to, not just for outreach like this, but also to talk to my colleagues. But the conversation is always something like, hey, I'm looking for a source on blah, 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 and I really can't find one. Does anyone know where there's something in print? Right? It's usually a very difficult or rare source. And it's a communication out to other experts, and other experts will return to me. And I have to say, every time I do that, I always get like one or two friends or family members who want to reply, and they have some comment. And I always think, oh, You are trying to teach an expert about a field you don't know anything about. And the same would be true if I tried to teach them about the things that I don't know about. So, for example, let's look at reference works just to give you a sense of this. So let's take the word saga. Okay, my favorite dictionary is the American Heritage Dictionary. This is the American Heritage College Dictionary. Doesn't matter in this case. I really love the American Heritage Dictionary. Well, let's say, is this a good source or is it not a good source? Is this a scholarly source or is this a popular source? Popular in this case means for the general public. That is to say, not an expert source. Well, you know, it's got a nice font, American Heritage. Boy, it sounds real important, right? Like things like Encyclopedia Britannica sounds important. But in fact, those are not scholarly sources. So I'll give you a good sense of this. Let's look up the word saga, like a Viking saga. In here we have saga, and it says, an Icelandic prose narrative of the 12th and 13th centuries dealing with the families that settled Iceland, the kings of Norway, and the Germanic gods and heroes. Or B, a modern prose narrative that resembles a saga, or the second one is a long detailed report. That's what it says for saga in here. Okay, great. But the problem is, I, as an expert in medieval literature, already knew all that. That's given me nothing. So what if I took something like, say, a handbook to literature, right? Well, let's look at what it has for saga. I'm not going to read it to you because it's quite long, but it starts here and goes down. It references other sources in here, and then other sources, other entries in the book itself, and then it has references at the bottom to tell me what I should look at. And that's a pretty short one. What if I did satire? Well, satire starts here and goes on for 2 pages. It's a 2-page long. It's a 2-page long definition. Why? Because it gets into all the detail that an expert would want. Because if I'm looking up something about sagas or satire or whatever, I'm not looking for basically what it basically is because I'm an expert in it. I'm looking for some detailed thing. Very often it's a case of like, if I'm doing satire and I suddenly for some reason can remember Horatian satire, but I can't remember Juvenalian satire. I don't remember the word juvenile. You know, when there's this line in the movie Lethal Weapon that says the man the torturer has forgotten more about pain than you and I will ever know. And you, as most people out there, are an expert in something, and you just know how it is when you're talking to other experts and suddenly you're blanking on a term of something that you know super well, right? This happens all the time. What do? You look it up. You don't look it up in a general dictionary that's for the general public. You would look it up in a source that's for, for someone like you, right? So someone who's an expert in the thing that you're an expert in. That's where you go for your resources. Okay. And so you want to look for resources that are in communication with other experts through works cited pages, through bibliographies. They reference them. They have long, detailed explanations about things. All right, so all that's great. But there's really those are just clues. In point of fact, being long-winded doesn't make you expert, right? Citing sources doesn't make you expert. It helps, but it doesn't make you expert. So there's really 2 things you want to do. The first one is already be an expert. If you're already an expert, you know what's important, right? And most of you out there, if you're an expert in something, I say, what are the important things I should read about this? You could tell me off the top of your head. You're like, oh, I use blah, 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 and this and that and the other thing, right? However, we're talking in this case mostly about students who don't already know. They don't have expertise in anything particular yet, or anything particularly academic or commercially viable yet. So how can I, as someone who's not an expert yet, figure out what I should be reading, what I should be looking at? When I'm standing under this waterfall of sources, all of them screaming I'm important, but I know that not all of them are. Well, here's what I suggest you do. Let's say that you have to write a paper, or maybe you're at your work and you have to do research on something that you really don't know a lot about. This has happened to me a few times in my life where I had to, for some reason, I had to write about something that I didn't have a particular subfield expertise in. So what do I do? Well, what I would do is I would literally just go to the library or go to online sources and pull bibliographies. I'm just pulling bibliographies. I'm not reading the articles, bibliographies, works cited pages, this kind of thing. And I'm looking at them not as search terms, but as the bibliographies themselves. I just pull some books off the shelf. I'd get a few journal articles about this. Maybe I'll pull them up or pull up websites, search for, XYZ bibliography, XYZ works cited page. And then I'm not going to read those sources. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look through all those works cited pages, all those bibliographies. I'm going to be looking for commonalities. What sources keep coming up over and over again? If I look at multiple bibliographies on a subject that I don't really know anything about, but I keep seeing over and over again, book after book after book, article after article, they keep referencing these same sources over and over again, that tells me that those sources are in some way influential. Those sources are ones that at least experts talk about. And then what I want to do is read those sources. I go back to those sources, and those are the ones I look at. And by the way, you look at their citations, you look at their footnotes, you look at who they're talking about, what influenced them, and what is the big conversation that experts are having. And so what I would urge students to do is, if you're given a research paper and they tell you you want to use professional and scholarly sources, use this technique. Go mine bibliographies and works cited pages of other things that are probably legitimate. If you just do 2 or 3, you could end up with like 2 or 3 freshman essays. So instead, you want to look at maybe 20 different things and just start going through them to find those things you see over and over again, and find out where the expert, professional, scholarly conversation is. And that's how you can find whether a source is a good professional source or just a general popular source for the general public that really isn't appropriate to be used in a professional setting or in an academic setting. I hope you found this helpful.